Good morning. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. And this morning, I'm really thrilled and honored to have with me as my guest Professor Cassie Holmes, who's a professor at UCLA and also author of a best-selling book, Happier Hour. Cassie, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to join you.
So, Cassie, you're written about a topic that I think we are all fundamentally extremely interested in, and that is about how to achieve happiness. And I know you also delve into the very close relationship between happiness and time, which is of course something that we all want more of, but is also limited. So,
Yeah.
talk to me a little bit about the relationship between those two.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one because I will say that as a happiness researcher, I actually found that my relationship with time started off as not very happy at all. In fact, I felt that for my happiness, time seemed to be the biggest barrier because, like so many, I felt time poor, that sort of acute feeling of having too much to do and not enough time to do it. And so many feel this way. In our research, we conducted a national poll that showed that nearly half of Americans feel time poor. They feel time strained. And that experience is really unhappy because of heightened feelings of stress. It makes us less healthy. So we're not likely to, we're less likely to exercise. It makes us less nice when we're in a rush. We're less likely to slow down and help others out. It makes us less confident in being able to achieve our goals, and it makes us less happy. And so many, and me being feeling that way earlier in my career, when I was an assistant professor at Wharton, I remember this night in particular where I was went up to New York to give a talk, and the talk was squished between back-to-back meetings. And then I'm rushing to catch the last train that would get me home to my 4-month-old and husband asleep in Philly. And I was like, I want more time, but not just more time to get more done. I wanted more time so that I could slow down and actually experience my hours, so that my entire life wouldn't continue to pass by in this blur. And I was at that point, I was like, maybe the answer is to quit, to quit my job, because then I would have a whole lot more time. And with this notion, if I had a whole lot more time, then I'd be happier. But the question is that true? And as an empirical question, it's actually one that I went on to test before deciding to quit my job. And what we found in our work is actually looking at the relationship between the amount of discretionary time people have and their happiness. Among our studies, in one of the studies, we analyzed data from the American Time Use Survey that looks at, for tens of thousands of working as well as non-working Americans, how they spent a regular day. And we calculated how much time they spend on discretionary activities, those activities that people want to do. And the pattern of results that we found was really interesting. It was this upside down U shape, so a negative quadratic relationship. So what's so interesting about that is that it means that actually happiness goes down on both ends of the spectrum. So yes, people with too little time are less happy. But what's really interesting is that actually there's such thing as having too much time. That in that data, those with more than approximately 5 hours of discretionary time in the day were less happy. And that's so interesting. And digging into it, it turns out that we are averse to being idle. That is, we want to be somewhat productive. And so, if you have all the hours day in and day out to spend exactly how you want, sometimes that can actually be associated with less happiness because it undermines people's sense of purpose.
Yes.
And so really, the answer for greater happiness isn't to have more time. It's really, how do you invest the time that you do have available to experience sort of not only some joy in your days, but satisfaction and fulfillment. So looking back at the end of the week, you're not just depleted. And even if you're busy, that you feel a sense of fulfillment, so that at the end of the years, you're not looking back with regret.
Okay, so how do you do that?
Yeah. So,
you set it up perfectly. Okay, so now
yes.
the answer, Cassie, is
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of pieces to it, but the two big chunks are identifying what are those activities that are worthwhile. And when I say worthwhile, that according to you, coming out of spending that time, you feel a sense of satisfaction, fulfillment, happiness, and also not only sort of prioritizing and protecting time for these most worthwhile activities, but also when you're spending the time, paying attention, that is not being distracted. So, and those are the sort of big things. It's making time for the stuff that matters and being engaged and not missing out on it because your mind is wandering elsewhere during those sort of precious times. And then there's all the sort of pieces within that of like, well, how do we help ourselves pay more attention? How do we identify those worthwhile ways of spending? And in Happier Hour, in my research, I identify some tools that folks can use, like time tracking. That is, over the course of researchers actually use this, of looking at what are the activities that people spend their days on, how do they feel over the course of their days, so you can pull out, on average, what are those activities that tend to be the most rewarding? What are those activities that tend to be associated with the most negative emotion? But that's based off of averages, right? And so what I encourage folks to do is to track their own time over the course of a week, writing down what are they doing and being more specific than just work or socializing. You know, what's the work task that you're doing? If you're socializing, whom are you with and what are you doing? And as importantly, as you come out of that time, that 30 minutes, those activities, rating on a 10-point scale. How do you feel? How satisfied? And while it's tedious to track your time, it's so worthwhile because at the end of the week, you can look at your own data and see what are those activities that you sort of made you feel the most satisfied, that got your highest ratings. And you can also see just how much time you spend on your various activities, because you can identify like, holy cow, I had no idea that I spent that much time on, X. But it didn't even make me happy, and it's maybe not that necessary. So as I teach this, I developed and teach a course to our MBAs and executive MBAs at UCLA called Applying the Science of Happiness to Life Design. And in doing this time tracking, one of my students actually the other week was like, it was so enlightening because here there was an activity that they thought they really enjoyed, watching TV. And in fact, they realized that actually based off their rating, they didn't enjoy it quite so much. And particularly not after that first hour. But then there were these activities that he totally dreaded, like exercise and socializing. And then he saw in the data, actually, he was giving 9s and 10s to those activities. These activities that he thought he didn't enjoy were actually tremendous sources of satisfaction and energy, And so that, information in itself is so clarifying and directive that it's not me telling you, these are the things you should do, these are the things you shouldn't do, but based off of your own data, what are those ways, those activities in your life that are worthwhile? What are those ways of spending that actually are a waste? And for so many of us who do feel time poor, that's such an opportunity to sort of reallocate, reclaim that wasted time, and then dedicate it to these other activities that matter.
What does your research tell you about the old adage, quality time versus quantity time? Those obviously are those are very both important factors. You talked a little bit about them. If you're going to spend time, not to be totally distracted, otherwise it doesn't really matter, or does it? Or I don't know. What does the research say about that?
Yes, it is absolutely about quality and not about quantity. And that comes into play in two ways. One is what I've already said, that it's not about having more available time that will make you happier, but also it's not about how much time you spend on a particular activity that is what determines the impact, the emotional impact of that activity on your overall happiness and satisfaction. Because we are distracted a whole lot of the time. So even if you go to the lengths of, all right, I'm going to spend my time on this activity that I know that, will potentially offer happiness. But if your mind is somewhere else, then you're missing out. And so there's interesting work by Dan Gilbert and Matt Killingsworth, where they would ping people over the course of their day and ask, what are you doing? As well as, what are you thinking about? As in, are you thinking about what you're currently doing? Or are you thinking about something else? As well as, how are you feeling right now? Like, how happy do you feel? And what they found is that we are distracted a whole lot of the time. Almost half, actually, 47% of the time, we are not thinking about what we're currently doing. Our mind is somewhere else. Also, we tend to be less happy when our mind is wandering. We tend to be happier when we are more engaged in what we're doing. And major source of distraction are cell phones, our smartphones, and they're so useful in so many ways, right? But just seeing them reminds you of all these other things you could and should be doing. And there was an experiment where they had friends dining together, and they told some to put their phones away out of sight. Others could leave their phones on the table. And what they found was that those whose phones were out of sight away reported enjoying the dining experience more because they were more engaged. And so this is to say that, again, if you are making those steps to like, okay, this is an activity that is important for me to make time for, when you're spending that time, don't have your mind wander somewhere else. Perhaps what I encourage folks to do is, for those really important times, make them no phone zones. Like, put your phone away. And this is not only for socializing, this is also for that work time that is so, like those hours, those activities that are so crucial to your sense of, like that are aligned with your purpose, that are really about making progress to the goals that matter to you. The work that you love, right? Of carving those out as no phone zones, phone away, close out of email, because then without that distraction, you're much more likely to enter a flow state, where you're so immersed in what you're doing, you're really creative, you're at your best using your skills. And then when you emerge from those states, it's so satisfying. But it's very easy to be distracted. And actually, in particular, some of those activities that bring us the most joy are very ordinary activities. Even if I ask you to reflect over your last 2 weeks, what were those times that you felt the most joy? Often they're really ordinary. It's like, for me, it's like my weekly coffee date with my daughter. And they're so ordinary that we don't notice them. It's very easy, and also where we tend to neglect doing them because we're like too busy, right? Or when we do them, we're rushing through them, or we're distracted on our phones thinking about what's next. But these, just because they're ordinary, doesn't mean there's not extraordinary happiness if we but pay attention. And it's easy to miss those moments because we're subject to hedonic adaptation. That is, we get used to things over time. So when you do the same thing again and again, you're with the same person again and again, it stops having the same emotional impact. And it's really good that we're adaptive in the face of negative experiences. But it's bad that we get so used to even the good stuff that we stop noticing. And so I also share strategies to help offset hedonic adaptation, so we continue to notice the joy in these daily joys, right? One of them is counting your times left. And oftentimes they're such everyday activities that we assume they will continue to happen every day in exactly the way that, they have so far. But, taking the example of my coffee dates with my daughter, she is 7 years old. In just, a few years, when she turns 12, I'm sure she'll probably prefer to go to the coffee shop with her friends than me. Sad, so it won't be every week. Then she's going to go off to college. And then she's going to, move somewhere across the country, right? And I calculated, of our total coffee dates, we have about 36% left. And that's much less than half. And she's only 7 years old. And that recognition is very affecting because it makes me make the time, even in those super busy weeks. No, like I carve out, we're going to have this 30 minutes of this time for the two of us to be together, munching on croissants and hanging out. And, but also it affects how I am engaged during that time, knowing that it is so precious, knowing that it is finite. And totally, my phone is absolutely away. That to-do list that's always running in my mind, thinking about what's next. It's like, no, that gets quieted because it doesn't matter what's next. This is the time that matters. So I pay attention, and it's only 30 minutes each week, but that 30 minutes has a tremendous impact on my overall happiness. Like that connection that I have, my relationship with my daughter is, yes, we spend other time together, but it's really that time that is the sort of basis of our wonderful relationship. So to answer your question, it's absolutely about quality, not quantity, right? Because it's also the happiness from that 30 minutes, like my coffee date with my daughter. It's not just the time during it, but we anticipate it. Right? I look forward to these dates, and then we remember it. We look back and we talk about it. And so when I'm assessing, like how happy am I, satisfied am I with my life? I can genuinely say that I am very satisfied because I've invested in what matters.
I don't want to get too sidetracked, but I was going to ask you, does your research also touch into and to this point about the importance of meditation and how that can help, the whole lady being more present and, really engage, that whole, and that's a muscle we can exercise more just in general. Like, have you looked at that at all or practiced it in any way?
And I do talk about it in the book. Meditation is so fantastic as exactly that. It's this practice of drawing your attention to the here and now, being more mindful of the present moment. And it is very affecting, and it's very effective at helping offset anxiety, like how our mind tends to wander to the uncertainty of the future, which is very anxiety provoking. And it's this practice of focusing on the here and now. I know that some folks have difficulty with meditation, and admittedly, I am one of those. So I also use other strategies. Like actually, in one of our experiments, we found that an intervention that is so simple yet so helpful is treating the weekend like a vacation. That is, we ran experiments because oftentimes our weekends are just a continuation of the week that we're constantly in the doing mode of checking things off our to-do list. And then the weekend comes and we continue in that mode of getting things done, checking things off the to-do list, moving through our activities sort of in anticipation of what's next, as opposed to treating the breaks in our weekends like the break that they are. And so what we found in experiments, so going into a regular Friday, we randomly assigned half, we gave them instructions, treat this weekend like a vacation. We told the others, treat this weekend like a regular weekend. On Monday, we reconnected with all of our participants, measured their happiness. Those who had treated the weekend like a vacation were significantly happier, and they had enjoyed the weekend more. What's interesting is that it actually the effect wasn't driven by differences in how they spent their time that weekend. It was their mindset. Those that treated their weekend like a vacation were more present. They were more mindful. They had shifted from this doing mode into being. And so during the weekend, they were just, even if they were doing the same activities, they were just more in those activities, much more present. And so to your question, yes, meditation is a good way to sort of practice so that you're more adept at sort of becoming more mindful. And then there's also other ways that we can sort of not trick ourselves, but get ourselves into being mode where we are aware of and attentive and in the moment.
So now that you've written this book and researched all this happiness, where are you taking things now? Are you exploring different areas of happiness, or are you moving on to something else? Tell me
I mean,
where are you going with this?
there are so many, still, it's such a rich topic and area. The thing that I would love to start exploring is a lot of our data is within the US and actually Western countries. And what I would love to start exploring is what's the relationship between time and happiness in different cultures and different countries to see,
Mm,
like, does not only are the antecedents to sort of time poverty different, or how does that our sort of conceptualization and treatment of time play out to influence our satisfaction, and can we learn from other cultures, and what are so taking that sort of more cross-cultural perspective, I'm excited to dig into and explore.
Does the time you spend studying happiness make you happy?
Yes, it is so fulfilling. I love it. Because also I apply what I find to myself. Like, couldn't be better. I mean, like, here I am. I talked about that night on the train where I was unhappy.
Yeah.
It's not like the circumstances in my, like, now instead of just having one kid, I have two. I still have my partner. I still have those friends, the never-ending pile of chores. But I am happy because I'm applying what I find in the research and what I teach to my students and share in the book to my own life, so that I'm like, yeah, I'm super happy.
How cool is that?
I'm so lucky. I feel yeah, I feel so lucky.
Well, Cassie, I really appreciate your taking the time to talk about this topic. What more important topic in life than happiness? So I think it's great what you're doing, and I really appreciate your taking the time to chat with me today.
Oh, well, thanks so much. It was definitely worthwhile time and an absolute treat.
This is Richard Hsu and Cassie Holmes. Thanks.